Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Drdha Vrata Gorrick learned classical arts for several years in South India from renowned iconography masters and has established himself as one of the leading experts and teachers of Vedic iconography. He has traveled the world exhibiting his works and conducting classes with the aim to introduce and promote the ancient art form. Living in South India himself, Drdha's works are in various private collections all around the globe, and his students are also spread far and wide. Drdha, thank you so much for being with me here on the podcast. And as someone myself with a creative background and a great interest in India, I am so thrilled to chat with you and delve a little bit into your world. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. And happy to finally meet in person.
Virtually.
Yeah, virtually at least. Yeah.
The best thing for the moment, for the time being. And so I know a little bit about your story because I've heard you on other podcasts, but you are evidently a highly accomplished artist, in my opinion, and creative person with a great reverence for upholding traditional art specifically and its profound technicalities. And as I said, as someone myself who has a background, both creative and performing arts, I would love for you to share with the listener a little bit of an overview of your personal journey, your greatest influences, how you came to this Indian art specifically, and anything else that you feel is pertinent to your unique story.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. And yeah, always happy to share whatever my journey and whatever I've learned. It's a bit of a long story, but I'll try to sum it up as brief as possible. Um, so I did come to India at a pretty early age. The first time I visited India was when I was 15, and that was I was invited on an apprenticeship for a newly constructed temple project in Delhi. So it wasn't exactly the most beautiful place to land, but
Mm.
nevertheless, I never went out of my state or out of the country or on an airplane for that part. So it was quite an adventure just getting on a plane and going somewhere else, and especially to India. This is at the
Mm-hmm.
time when there wasn't much information on the internet about what to expect in India, right? So I was reading every guidebook on India and, getting scared with all the different types of malarias you can get and things. So I was really I think it was quite an experience just to be a 15-year-old going to another country. I was going alone without my parents. So
Wow.
I landed in Delhi. I was part of a project that this architect who was working on the project that it had invited me to be a part of, to watch the process, to maybe learn a little bit about temple construction, and also just to, understand a little bit about India and its culture and things. So I'd known a lot about India from a young age. My parents were, like early hippies that kind of got really interested in Eastern philosophy and ideas. And my dad he would travel all over the world, so he would collect art and books and different things from different countries and a lot from India. So we always had some kind of Indian art or books about India in our home. So getting to go personally and see India after, having all that, um, sort of book knowledge and just looking through books, for so many years, it was nice to get that actual experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed in India initially for the first 6 to 8 months. That was like a lot to take in. I think
Yeah.
the weather changed, the food, the language, everything was just so it was like a shock to the system. But I was really adventurous, and I was like ready for the experience. I was trying to absorb as much as I could, and I would go to many temples. Not far from Delhi is Vrindavan, the birthplace of Krishna. So I spent quite some time there. And when I was there, there were a group of artists that were working on the same project that I was involved with, and they were painting different scenes from Mahabharata and Ramayana. And these were artists from all over, like from Russia, Ukraine, America, England. And they were all like contributing their art to this project. So I got to spend time with some of them. Some of them I had known from books and just heard about, and being able to, watch them paint and also like ask them questions and see their process. That was a very nice experience. Um, Shortly after that, I went back to the US. I had like a short visa, so I came back. I was trying to figure out what to do next. I'd applied to join college shortly after that. I always felt like there's something pulling me back to India. Like I always
Mm.
wanted to go back again. Um, so even though I was going to art college, and I was attending all these art courses because I'd always had interest in art. I always wanted to pursue it a little further. Um, but I always felt like there was more inclination to a more classical form of art. And when I was going to art college in the US, that was pretty much completely discouraged. All my art classes were discouraging classical forms of art, even European classical. And the sort of their conclusion, or their idea was that modern art or abstract art is you know, uh, the greatest achievement of art.
Mm.
So, and I didn't really agree with that. I felt like art it should be based on maybe, um, it should be reflecting beauty, or it should be showing, some kind of, beautiful context, maybe sorry, nature, divinity, and these kind of things. I felt like it should reflect those ideas, or at least it should have a beautiful message to it.
Hmm.
And I felt like when I was in art school, there was always like this, um, the context or the messages were always quite disturbing, or dark, or you could see that what people were creating in the name of art was actually disturbing the mind rather than
Mm, right.
calming the mind and giving that tranquility and stuff, because we hear that art is a very therapeutic process, right?
Hmm.
Both for the creator and also for the person who's viewing it. And when you see modern art, it feels like it's having that opposite effect. It's just a disturbance to the mind. So that was my experience in the art world in the West. So then I was always kind of tilting more toward classical art forms, and I wasn't sure where could I learn these art forms. The one possibility was to go to Europe and see if I could find an art school there. And then since I'd seen a lot of Indian art, I thought, well, maybe somewhere in India or Southeast Asia somewhere. And I always had it on the back of my mind that I should, it would be so nice to learn some classical art form. So I was kind of like dragging my feet through college, just to get the grades. And I have an older brother who used to travel a lot around South India. He likes Narasimha, and so he would go to all these temples, and he called me and he said, why don't you just get on a flight and meet me here? We'll travel around. Let's see what happens. And, I hesitated for a while, and then he just said, just get your flight and come. So, so I got on the next flight I could to South India. I think I landed in Madras, and then we traveled around, the most of the southern part of India, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu.
Nice.
And after a lot of like really austere traveling, we kind of needed to rest. So we rested in this town called Mahabalipuram, or
Mm.
Mamalapuram as it's called now. And this is just off the coast of Chennai. So, and little did I know that that town is actually famous for classical Indian art, like, very traditional temple architecture and sculpture and classical art forms. And they have a school there, a college that teaches this form of art. So while we were there to actually rest, we noticed that they had a school, they had many sculpting studios. The whole town is just beaming with art. And it's a nice coastal town as well, with beaches and nice resorts and things. But I think what really attracts a lot of people there is the history and the arts. So while I was there, I was kind of walking around to different sculpting studios and seeing the kind of work they do. And I was really like attracted to what they were doing. And then I picked up in one of the studios, they had a book, one of these books actually by my artist. I mean, sorry, book by one of my teachers that I didn't know would be my teacher. And this is the actual book
Wow.
that I picked up. It's in the
So
local
cool.
language.
Mm-hmm.
And I was flipping through the pages and I was like, wow, this is exactly what I want to learn. I mean, like I didn't
Mm.
have any hesitation. I was like, this is what I've been looking for, you know. It's very classical, very technical, a lot of emphasis on proportions and symmetry. Because although I like art, I've always been more drawn to more technical sides of art,
Mm-hmm.
the proportions, the symmetry. I like Da Vinci's drawings a lot because they have a
Yeah.
lot of this kind of technical stuff too, because he was like an engineer. So when I saw this, I was like, this is perfect. And it has so much information about how to create these gods and goddesses who I was quite familiar with growing up with, a lot of these books about them. So then I was like, okay, this is what I want to learn. What do I do next? And I was trying to find out about the author of the book. So I was asking around to different people, and they said, yeah, he's from here. He lives in the same town. You can actually walk to his house just up the road. So I went to my teacher's house. I was knocking on the door. His wife was there. She said, "Yeah, come back later," in her broken English. So I went back and I met my teacher, and I spoke to him. I said, I really want to learn this art form. Could I just stay here and learn?" And he was trying to see how serious I was, because a lot of people come and they want to learn, but they don't end up staying so long. So
Mm-hmm.
he told me you go to the college and you ask in the college whether they would take you in. And I went there, but the full curriculum is in the local dialect.
Yeah.
So the principal there, he also pulled me aside and he said, look, this teacher, this person that you met, he is the best person to learn from. Just go directly and ask him to teach you, like a guru shishya
Mm-hmm.
relationship. So I did that. I went back to him. I said, I want to learn from you and I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to leave. So then he said, okay, yeah, you can start. So I made my arrangements and then, got a place to stay, and I started learning from him. I stayed there for about 5 years, where I learned during that time I had learned different aspects of the traditional art, most of which are based on the shastras called the Shilpa Shastras. So
Mm-hmm.
there are different techniques, including iconography, iconometry, so measurements, proportions, um, different attributes, and all the symbolism that go along with those forms. So I learned the drawing, the painting, and I learned also how to sculpt. So I was actually learning how to make the murtis in 3 dimension.
Wow. Mm.
So I did that for about 5 years, and that got me pretty much to where I am now. A long journey after I studied, but now I'm here and I'm sharing the same knowledge back with people that I teach.
Wow. Such a enriching story. So much serendipity, and it just seems like there's so much like positive karma at play. And even just like since you're born, being born and being given a Sanskrit name by your parents, and just the seeds are there. And I have no doubt that I'm sure on one or many occasions there have been people that have said to you, oh gosh, you must have been Indian in your past life or something like
Yeah.
that, because it's quite astounding and incredible. Yeah, this just whole process and journey, like you've been clearly very strongly directed to this work and the path and where you are now, which is so beautiful. And as you explained your story, I had a similar experience. I remember the first time I had learned of Odissi dance, and which I've been studying now for about 11 years. And
Oh, wow.
classical ballet background and upbringing, very, very technical, but I was forced into retirement in my early 20s. Da, da, da. It's not about me,
Wow.
this episode, but
Right, right.
essentially I came to discover, after traveling to India and whatnot, someone put Odissi in front of me, and I just happened to see a very esteemed dancer, and immediately I was like, I need this in my life. Like this is what I need to do. I thought I was retired. I thought everything was yoga, and now, I need to pursue that, and that firm knowing. And what I really greatly appreciate about Odissi and all of the Indian arts is their technicality,
No.
is their attention to detail, and their upholding of tradition and traditional forms and processes, but also going back to something else you said is like this beauty. Everything, the arts are all about upliftment and
Yeah,
raising consciousness and elevating life and transcendence, and there's this real positivity
yeah,
around all of that, which is really truly enriching. And you
definitely.
touched on the Shilpa Shastra, which I was going to ask you about, and I guess you've given a little bit of an overview. But is there anything else you wanted to add, just to lay a further foundation for your work and the context of our conversation? These texts, and I guess my question to you is, they prescribe sort of technicalities, but is that with reference to multiple different styles of Indian art, or is that specifically for like iconography or temple construction? Like what is this speaking to, or these texts speaking to?
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, so the Shilpa Shastras are basically like it's an umbrella term, of many different sources from various shastras, the Vedas, the Puranas,
Right.
Itihasas, and
Mm-hmm.
all of them speak to some degree about some form of art. And it's not specific to maybe iconography, but even a broader, spectrum of art and maybe even engineering. So you have texts that are related to construction of temples, related to making palaces, even laying out towns and canals and all these more like engineering type of sources. So, but a vast majority of them are more related to temple and deity or icon forms. So they'll describe, in many cases, they'll describe the proportions that are used to create those forms, whether it's a temple form or a deity form.
Mm-hmm.
The different attributes that go along with them. What do they hold in their hands? What are the colors of their bodies? What kind of clothing and ornaments do they wear? All these different aspects, and also a little bit about the rituals that go along with them. So there's different rituals that you would do throughout the
Mm-hmm.
process. And some of the Shilpa Shastras are very descriptive. Like they go into so much detail to the point of like they'll describe how many eyebrows are in the eye and things like this, like very, very detailed. Um, so there's one Shilpa Shastra, which is one section of one of the Puranas, and it's like a whole section just related to Shilpa, and it's called the Chitra Sutra. Um, the sutra is about Chitra or art. And it goes into a lot of detail. It's one of the popular Shilpa Shastras that are available now. There's not a lot of them. I think up till now there's something like 30 to 35 texts that have been discovered, some of which are translated into English. Most of them are, either in Sanskrit or in local dialects. And Chitra Sutra is one of the, ones that's been translated quite a few times, and it has a lot of resource material. Talks a lot about the technicalities as well. There's even some description in there about different forms of humans and their measurements. And funny enough, it's kind of related to Da Vinci's drawing of the Vitruvian Man within the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar description of what Da Vinci was inspired by to draw that Vitruvian Man. They have very similar, almost exact descriptions in the Shilpa Shastra that relate to the
Wow.
measurements of the perfect man.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of detail. Not all the material is easily available,
Yeah.
but most of the material is similar in its approach and its techniques. So you'll find a lot of similarities of very classical styles of Indian art using the same proportions, using similar attributes.
Mm-hmm.
The difference comes is in the style or in the creativity. So if you look at, let's say, and a good example is the Hoysala sculptures of North Karnataka versus the Pallava and Chola sculptures. They're very different in their finishing, and that's because of the material that they were using. Pallavas were using very strong granite stone, so that limits the amount of detail work that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hoysalas were using a softer stone, so it gave them so much more flexibility in their ornamentation and the
Mm.
details that they could put into their work. But they would be using the same foundation from Shilpa Shastra, the proportions, all the iconography, but they'll have just different approaches based on the material and their style. So the Pallavas
Right.
and Cholas focused a lot more on the forms of the body, the anatomy, less jewelry, more beauty of the actual body, whereas the Hoysala is a lot more, you know, really detailed ornamentation. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll find different styles all over India. And if you look at the really early styles of art, so if you look, even if you go to Odisha and you see the really old sculptures, compare that to Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, they're very similar. The iconography is very similar. Um, just some later forms of that art changed and then they, of course, got more creative or they mixed with different styles and then, things started to change. And also more contemporary artists maybe don't follow this tradition of
Mm-hmm.
Shilpa Shastra
Yeah.
techniques. It's more creative.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say kind of sums up what the Shastras are and how they're used. Many artists, traditional artists, still use them in their practice, especially those who are doing temple construction or creating murtis, for example. Even if you look at the Ram statue that was made for Ayodhya, that sculptor I know from Bangalore, from Mysore, he also used a lot of the traditional proportions. And then, of course, he finishes it with his own unique style and finishing.
Sure. I have a question for you actually that came up while you're explaining all of that. And that is, I'm just curious to know in these texts, uh, does it not only give you the, I guess, the attributes, the guidelines, the instruction, the technicalities, but does it also explain why? Or even just down to things like colors or adornments that you might put on a murti? Like, is there, or is that something that is expected to be sort of decoded by the guru, elaborated on in that sort of setting? Or, yeah, do the texts give some indication in any way?
That's a good question. Yeah, no, no, I think it's like you said that it's more taught by the guru, the, sort of the philosophical concepts behind why you do things. Um, and even the more subtle techniques, like the sort of hidden techniques that you don't see in the books or directly from the sculptors or artists is taught usually by the teacher. So I had a teacher. So just moving back a little bit to when I was studying, because I'm a foreigner, and also not only I'm a foreigner, but I'm outside of the caste who usually do this traditional art form. They're called the Vishwakarma caste or community. And usually this knowledge related to Shilpa or Vastu or temple architecture is kept within that community and they protect it and try to continue. So I wasn't really welcome to learn this art form initially because of being an outsider. And of course, there's always some, what's the word, like hesitation to give it to someone else because if they don't respect it or they misuse
Sure,
it,
yeah.
exploit it. So, and we've seen a lot of examples of that. So, initially when I was trying to learn this art form, I had a lot of, there's a lot of blocking to learn. But the two teachers that I ended up learning from are from outside of the community. Of course, they're Indian artists, but they are not within the Vishwakarma community. So they shared a lot of inside knowledge that they learned with a lot of struggle. So one of the things that they teach you when you're creating a form of a deity is that there's a way of creating a measuring stick using a palm leaf,
Hmm.
right? Most people, it's not written in a book anywhere. It's just something that they teach you. The teacher comes, he says, okay, take a palm leaf, cut it like this, and then you fold it in different ways. And then that creates a traditional measuring stick or a measuring tape. And you just keep it in the water when you're not using it, and it stays for a long time. And my teacher was telling me that this is not something that's shared very, very easily. It's quite usually hard to get this kind of information.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this, background or context and the philosophy, a lot of it comes from the teachers, right? Or it's something
Hmm.
that you're learning, with experience, right? So if you have
Yeah.
a guru, a spiritual guru, they also would know some more context about the deities and how what they mean. So a lot of this I learned after I studied Shilpa Shastra. So I learned a lot about the forms and why are the different forms in different ways, why they have different arms, what do the symbols mean, and all that. But there's not a huge amount of information in the text, that go into details because it's kind of expected that people know that already.
Yes,
Because I
got
think
it.
you might have also experienced that in Indian society, most people know the basics about many things, right? Like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of women at home, they know about home remedies. They don't learn it from a
It's
book or
just part of
something. Their mom,
life.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So it's expected that you already know, these people would already know it, so you don't have to repeat it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or the guru is teaching it. So that's my understanding and my experience of how that works.
Yeah, which is, I suppose, really important. Like, whatever practices or discipline we associate with from India, whether it's yoga or Ayurveda or etc., having that cultural context or at least appreciation for the cultural context is so important, I think, and really valuable to deepening our understanding, which is why I think, it's just a profoundly supportive experience to spend some solid time in India for sure. And I'd love to know
Yeah.
more a little bit about you. You touched on rituals, so what are some of the spiritual or perhaps ritualistic things that we learn from the various? There's many, obviously, the Shilpa Shastra that relate to the process of creating this really sacred and traditional art.
Yeah, there are a few things. Pretty much starting from the beginning, before you even draw the form of that god or goddess, you start with the Dhyanashloka, which is like the basis of your whole creation. And a Dhyanashloka is basically a descriptive verse. So it describes that form. And those Dhyanashlokas are found throughout the Shastras. You can find them almost anywhere when there's a description of a different particular form of a god or goddess. They will describe usually their um, what their form looks like, the color of their body, what their face looks like, their expressions, how many hands they have, right? The different objects that they hold in their hands. These are dhyana shlokas. Some of them will also have a little more philosophical ideas behind them, how to approach that god or goddess, how to worship them, etc. So those dhyana shlokas are usually taken by the traditional artists and studied and also meditated upon. So you're meant to actually go into this dhyana. You're meant to, go into a meditation and visualize that form internally. And then you start the process of creating. So it's not like that form is coming from us, from our mind. This is something that's being meditated upon, and we're how do you say, um, inviting that god or goddess to come into our mind so that we can visualize
Mm,
them, right?
mm-hmm.
Taking their blessings and things like that. So then we start our process of drawing the form using the techniques of proportions and all these different things that we learned from the Shilpa Shastras. So combining those two, then you can create a really beautiful form. Because if you start with the Dhyana shlokas, you already have a proper intention, right?
Yeah.
You're doing this like, okay, this is not me doing it. I am not the creator, but you're seeking, reverence, or you're asking the blessings from that god or goddess that me be that the tool that creates this form.
The channel.
So you
Yeah.
use me to create that form, and that gives that form a much more spiritual connection, I think, between the, devotee and the God. And people can see that. They can see that a person has put more than just their skill into, creating that form, but they've also put their devotion into it. And you can see this with a lot of, I've experienced this when I've seen art done by really experienced and spiritual or devotional artists, that you can see a complete difference in the way that you visualize that form, the way that you respect that form. Um, and then apart from that, after you've created the form, there's a ritual which has to do with opening the eyes. So
Oh.
traditionally, you would create the whole body and you would leave the eyes or at least the middle part of the eyes till the end. So you wouldn't do that until the end. And if it's a murti or a deity, you would close the eyes, and then only during the installation or the prana pratishtha, when they, install the deity, then they remove that, and the carver actually takes a gold chisel and hammer, and he carves out the, round parts of the inside of
Wow.
the eyes.
Oh.
And then there are some mantras that are chanted. There's a whole process to that. So even when I'm drawing the form, I also do the same thing. I wait till the whole form is finished, and then at the end I open the eyes. So it's like when the eyes are open, that deity is alive,
Mm-hmm.
along with the
Beautiful.
mantras that are chanted and things. And then of course after that, the whole process of worship and that goes into the hands of the temple priest, right? How they worship it. But that going through that whole process is definitely a very ritualistic process in my view.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, so beautiful. No, that's so interesting because I'm aware of the process of the installation of a murti, say in a temple or even in your home, but to do that with the drawn form, that form that you're creating in a different modality. Let's say I sort of didn't cross my mind, but wow, like that's just adds a whole other level and a layer of just richness and beauty to your work and whatnot.
It's also it's also a very personal process. That's one thing I want to also mention, that you know uh you could go to a bazaar and you can pick up a deity that's already made and bring it home and then worship it, right? But what used to happen before is that a person would approach a carver that I want to make a murti for my temple or for my home, and there was a whole process that involved that person being very much involved in that. So the first part of it is they would usually take measurements of the person's, body, some part of the body, usually the fingers. And then they would use that as the unit, the base unit, to measure either the deity or the temple. That's one
Mm,
thing. Another thing is like when you're making a deity of a murti in metal, the process of making that murti is described as being like giving birth to a child, because even the mold that's used for casting the metal murti is like a womb. They actually call it the womb.
mm,
And then after it's casted, you open that up, and then you have your baby, the murti, right? And then you're worshiping it. So that whole process is very not only spiritual but also very personal. So that's
mm-hmm.
another aspect that's quite nice.
Oh, I love all that. Yeah, this is so fascinating. And I hope it inspires anyone who's listening to delve into your work and consider investing in a piece of your art. Because, yes, you could so easily just look at something, Google, you want a picture of a deity and print something off that you find on the internet. But to know that this kind of dedication and devotion has been actually put into a very specific piece makes it such an incredible investment and far more cherished as well. No doubt, for people to have in their space or on their altar or on their wall. Yeah, and so I'd love to know just a handful or a couple of the essential rules or guidelines. I know you've kind of indicated already a few, but that pertain to iconography or any form of the divine, various deities and then that process of making a murti and whatnot. If there's
Okay.
anything
Yeah.
else, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the main aspects that you have to keep in mind when it comes to creating a god or goddess, as iconography goes, one is you have your Dhyanashloka that you start with. So you have to take the source of your form from Shastra. So everything that you do should be authorized from Shastra. That's the first point. The second point is the proportions. So in classical terms, they call that talamana. So you're familiar with dance, so you might know tala. Tala
Tala,
means
yeah,
like, right, clapping
yeah.
or
The
dancing or
rhythm and
beat.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
rhythm. So this talamana is a rhythmic measurement, and it's very similar between dance and music and art. Actually, a friend of mine, a dancer, a friend of mine from the US, he and I had a discussion about, there was also a blog where, a recording where we were talking about the similarities between talamana and tala and dance and
Ooh,
music. So
yeah, cool.
it was quite a cool discussion.
Yeah.
So using the talamana based on the form that you're drawing. So if it's a god or a goddess, they would have a specific Dalamana that they fall within. There are different categories of these Dalamanas. They go from um, 1 to 10 units, basically. So within those group of Dalamana scales, you would find a god or goddess that would fall within that category. And after that, you would have their attributes that you have to keep in mind. So what are the objects that they hold in their hands? We know that Ganesha, he holds the Ankusha and the Pasha. That's his standard, weapons. And then he has other forms that have other weapons, but the standard ones are these two. We know that Vishnu has Shankha and Chakra. So things like that you should know. And then they'll have, um, the number of arms and who are their sort of entourage, who are the personalities that come with them, their Vahana or their carrier. Shiva rides the bull, Vishnu rides Garuda, and then you have their wives or their children. So Shiva has his Parivar, the um, Kartikeya, Ganesha, Parvati, like that. So um, and then of course the color of the body and things like that. So and you should be a little familiar with what are the different forms of that god or goddess. So they have multiple forms. Vishnu has his Dasavatars, and so many other forms. There are infinite number of forms of gods and goddesses, and especially in
Mm-hmm.
Hinduism. So you should be a little familiar with those so that you can tell what are the differences.
Mm.
And then of course some basic techniques of whatever drawing or sculpture that you should know. But a very important factor is that and what separates it from Western art is that the emphasis is not given to realism, right, of the body, that we're trying to recreate our physical form and then just plopping a head of an elephant on top and saying that's Ganesha. But that we're following all these traditional measurements, this perfection of form based on Shilpa Shastras, and the rasa or that mood that's in that murti is
Mm.
what wants to be shown more, right? And that's what kind of separates it between Western art and well, even Western traditional art and Indian or Southeast Asian art, is that they give a lot more importance to the context. What is the mood of that murti? What is the message that it's trying to give? And also ultimately, what is the relationship between the devotee and the god and the devotee? So we're trying to create that connection between, that relationship between the viewer and the murti. So
Mm.
that's at
Mm-hmm.
least from
Not
my
much at all.
understanding. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's so impressive. And so with all that in mind, I guess for those of us that, are not have nowhere near in a million lifetimes the experience that you have, but what would be something that you think that one should look for if they're investing in either an image or a sculpture of a murti? Like what are we looking for? Like I don't know. Like what comes off, out of your mind when I ask you that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, because I have the experience, I think it's easier to point out these aspects. But I think for someone who's just coming from not knowing much, then one is you want to look for I like to encourage someone to make a murti, so create something new, ideally, if you can, because that already gets you more involved in the process, right? If you think of it as having a child, the more you have, this in your mind that I want to have a child, then that process becomes more personal. You become more connected to it.
The relationship, yeah.
There's a lot more of a relationship there and expectations and all that. Um, Rather than just going to a market and picking up a murti. Later on, you could create a relationship with that, but it's nice to have that involvement. And if you can't be like get someone to carve it, I mean, there are so many carvers all over India. So many people come to me and they say, look, I want to make a murti. So I'll connect them to a carver. I'll say, this person's the right one. You decide on the material that you want to have first. So there are a lot of practical aspects. Like not everybody can have a stone murti in their home,
Mm,
right? They're more for temples because they're heavy. They're,
yeah.
uh, quite hard to get made. They're expensive and all that. But usually metal or wooden deities, these are, ones that are preferred in homes. once you decide on the material, you find the carver, you have it made, you think about what form that, you know, uh, that connects to you. So traditionally in astrology also, when you do your chart, right, your Jyotish chart, then you find out that there's a form or a murti that's for your like beneficial for you. So maybe for me it's Narasimha, or for someone else it might be Shiva or whatever. So ideally you want to go with that form, or a form of, let's say, Shiva within any of his forms. Um, then it'll ultimately be beneficial for you and your family. And then of course you have to just decide on the size and all that. But what you want to look for is a carver that has um some training in the Shilpa Shastra. So they should know about the Dhyanashloka. They should know about the proportions. If they start trying to tell you that they just made it on their own and things, then maybe it's not such a good idea to go with them. And another thing is to look for quality, right? This is very important. And not everybody's able to spot the differences of, let's say, a factory made murti and something that's really
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
quality. So you want to look at the quality of the finish. Should be able to see most of the features of the god or the
So the
goddess, right?
detail.
Yeah, so you're looking at their face, you're looking at their hands. These are the important parts of the body that you should look out for. And another very important thing, and there's a whole description on this, a whole section in Shilpa Shastra that talks about murtis that shouldn't be worshipped, um, or what's the word, uh, like negative traits of a deity. So for example, like if something's broken in the deity, if the deity's nose is broken or something, some
Right,
part of the
okay.
body, you shouldn't worship that deity. It's
Mm,
actually bad for you to
okay.
worship. So it should be discarded. Usually they throw it in the river or whatever. But now because people are like finding all these old antique murtis in rivers and under the ground, these are deities that were discarded. They're being taken back out and
Mm,
put in people's homes and stuff. Um, so you want to watch out for things like that. There's descriptions of like, cracks, lines in the body. So you want to look out for certain things. But most traditional carvers, they are very aware of that. And they usually, if they're honest, they're not going to sell you a murti that's going to be bad for you because it'll also have an effect on them.
yeah, yeah. Bad
Um,
karma for them.
yeah. So these are the kind of things you want to look for. It's hard to sometimes spot, but I recommend taking time and approaching it, slowly and really do your research to try to find something. And also you'll have a feeling that maybe one place may have more of a commercial mood when you're approaching them, and one person may be much more like maybe spiritual or devotional about the whole process. So then you have a good positive experience, when you're buying from someone like that.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. That's really helpful. Thank you. And so I'd love to know if you wouldn't mind taking us briefly into this world of temple architecture, into Vastu. What are some of the profound things that you've personally discovered that we, especially as foreigners, those of us not from that cultural heritage and cultural context, we can't always see or understand with respect specifically to how a temple is designed, constructed, and experienced. You go into the temples and you see the beautiful maps of the temple grounds, like that bird's eye view. But I think
Yeah,
for a lot of people that don't have that foundational knowledge or appreciation, it's like it's a building because this is the way they've built it, but obviously there's
exactly.
much more
Yeah.
depth to that. Is there anything you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not like super what do you say? I don't have a lot of experience in like temple architecture and that, but from my experience and even just my experiences of visiting temples and the vibration that you get from them, that could say a lot. So from my understanding, there's this whole concept, and this is not specific to India, but there's this whole concept of building temples where they are a reflection of the cosmos, or a reflection of the divinity, right? And this goes the same for a murti. So even though we're worshiping a murti, it's not God himself, but it's like, it's um what's the word that you can say? Like yeah, it's like a reflection of God, that he's there, his Shakti or whatever you want to say is there, but it's ultimately it's a stone or wood or metal carving. but it's our way of being able to connect to God in our limited state, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the temple is like that. It's our connection to divinity through, the perfect layout of the temple, the way that it's laid out. It, you know, um, enhances the positive vibrations that we get. So even if you think of walking around the temple when you're doing this pradakshina, you're doing these three circles, and that has a very positive effect. The vibration coming from the sun, from all these different things, and um, you're touching your feet on the stone. Um, the layout of the temple is made in such a way where it has the most positive effect on you, right? And then if you look at the bird's eye view, like you were mentioning, well, both the bird's eye view and also the elevation, both are actually considered to be similar of the like as similar to the human form. So a lot of the names that are used for the different parts of the body are the same names that are used for the parts of the temple. So the pada is like the feet of the temple, or the what do you say, the pedestal. Then they have the janu, the legs are like the pillars, etc. And then the topmost part is called the shikara, or the shika. So this is like the human form being used as like a um this idea of the microcosm macrocosm connection, that we are, even though we're human, we have the ability through our forms to be able to connect to divinity, right? And the temple is a reflection of that, right? And even this is talked about in Western European architecture. There's a whole book of temple architecture done by Vitruvian, who's the man who Da Vinci was inspired by. And he also talks about this concept of the temple being a reflection of the cosmos, that we're using this building to connect to divinity through the way that we lay it out, through the way that the materials are used, and of course ultimately the spiritual connection there, the divinity that's inside. So that's my kind of limited understanding of how the temple works and how it can positively affect us. And this is something that we're not even aware of in most cases. Obviously, the more you go in depth into this, there are some really nice researches that have been done about, the sort of scientific effects of temples and the temple architecture and things like that that you can look into. But for me, I just see that um, any way you approach a temple, it's both a positive experience for you, and it's also ultimately going to have some effect on you spiritually, whether you want to see it or not. So you're
Mm-hmm.
going to come out of that experience and feel better about yourself. And also because of all the carvings that you see in the temple, there's a lot of information that also you can gain from, the temple sculptures. There's stories that are depicted. There are different, sculptures of animals and creatures, both divine and human, and a lot of information about daily life. Like you see sculptures about karma, for example, about love. You see sculptures about animals. You see about, wars and different things. So it's like uh, a sculpted encyclopedia, basically. That's the way my teacher used to say
Mm,
temples were. So, anybody can come in there and learn something just by seeing these forms. And
yeah.
the last thing I would say is that because of the beauty and the way that they were created, these temples, and the beautiful sculptures, the art that and adorns them, art is something that has a very, profound effect on people, right? That it definitely, soothes the mind, especially when it's, very beautiful art. It's very therapeutic. So even if we're just looking at it from the point of view of, appreciating art, you're going to have such an amazing experience when you go and you see some of these temples with their, carvings and paintings and things.
Yeah. Yeah, profoundly transformative, that's for sure. And there's definitely something energetic when you're inside, especially the big ones, the greats. I mean, and actually, I shouldn't just say that. Like I was thinking of Chidambaram or something like that, but I've also been into some smaller local temples where there's not a lot of tourism, not even a lot of Indian tourism, and they're the potency in there
Yeah.
is pretty sublime for sure. And so, I mean, you live in India, you're in Karnataka, and I'd love to know what your experience has been of sort of this integration or intersection of the various Indian disciplines and art forms. Our modern mind really leans toward that sense of compartmentalization. And however, no doubt you've witnessed and experienced so much of the wisdom traditions of India,
Mhm.
just inherently intertwined in daily life. So, what are your some final thoughts on that you might like to share?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I often get asked like, what style of art that I learned. That's like one of the first questions I get asked. So what style are you practicing? And it's hard to describe that because it's traditionally this is the Indian classical style of art, right? And I could say it's a South Indian style, but even that it's not very accurate because, they, practice a style of art throughout India. So in my experience, actually, uh, in olden times, they had the same process for most of the classical art forms, right? If we're talking just about visual arts, they would have followed the same kind of tradition and the same practices and proportions. And like I mentioned, there's just some stylization differences, right? The way that the ornament might be different, the way that they do the finishing is different, and the materials that they use are different, right? Different parts of India have different stone and different materials. And even if you look at India as a whole, Indians are Indians, right? But if you go to different states, they have different languages, different dress,
Mm-hmm.
dress customs, um, and they're just slightly different in every state. So I look at the art in a very similar way that there is a lot of connection to the different art forms. Whether you're, from the north, say northeast Bengal, all the way down to the southern tip of South India, there are a lot of similarities. So they worship similar types of gods and goddesses. You'll see, a lot of the different forms, similar kind of forms. They create their forms in a very similar way, and they worship in similar ways. But there's always obviously a lot of variety in practices like, rituals. Some people focus more on the tantric side, some people, in other places they do more panchatric system of worship. So I think what I've experienced with especially Hinduism is that, Hinduism as a whole or Sanatan Dharma as a whole, they all follow this practice of Sanatan Dharma. But within Sanatan Dharma, there's so much variety of ideas and practices and things that people can approach, right? So there's not one, specific what do you say, direction, but there's so many options available so that there's something for everyone, right? There's some practice that anybody can be a part of. It's not very rigid in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's that Sanatan Dharma umbrella that holds everybody together. So I see the art and the temple architecture and even some of the practices in a similar way that, I can't say that I do only South Indian art because when I look at early Bengal art, like Pala, the Pala dynasty art, their carvings look exactly the same as, ancient South Indian art. So I think they would have all, fallen within this system of Shilpa Shastras, and
Mm.
they've all created their own unique styles from that. And later on, there are more like local, what you call like folk styles of art that are quite different, like Madhubani style of art, which is quite popular now. It was more of a folk art. It was something that, ladies used to do at home and they would paint on their walls. And so it was more freehand, it was more expressive. It didn't have to have these rigid, rules and regulations. It was more of an expression of love or devotion. So that's what I see. I see there's like everything is there, but then, there's something that holds it all together with some variety in it. So that's been my experience for the most part in India and in Indian art and learning Indian philosophy. Um, I think even if you're living in India, if you can speak one Indian language, you can kind of get by, because even if you look at the way that, communication works in India, half of it is expression, right? It's just the movement of your head, it's
Yes.
the movement of your hands. So you can kind of get
Yes.
by
Your
just with
eyes. Yes.
that. So, even though there's different languages, you can kind of, you can make it if you know the basics. So
Mm,
yeah, I think that's been mostly my experience. And
yeah.
I've had such a positive experience where I felt like um I was really welcomed to learn this art and to absorb all this knowledge. And even now when I'm teaching it, I feel like, the same people who I learned it from are like, I've learned it from India and now I'm giving it back, as best I can, back to mostly Indian people living, in the West. So
Mm.
it's been such an amazing experience, and I'm so grateful to have learned this. And of course, all the credit goes to my teachers and, you know, to God ultimately.
What an incredible journey. And it's very exciting to see what will come for you as well as you continue on this path of art and creativity. And it's really wonderful. And so with that in mind, I mean, I could ask you many questions. I find this such a fascinating area. I mean, I probably say that with almost every guest I have on, and there's good reason why I invite certain people on. So but yes, I would love for you to share with us any way in which people can either work with you or learn from you, or perhaps invest in some of your incredible art. Yeah, please share. And of course, social
Thank you.
media where people can find you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. And it's such I'm so thankful for you to invite me on this on your podcast. Just to highlight the classical art. I'm sure you could do a podcast just on your journey and the way that you learned classical dancing, which is pretty amazing. I'm a big fan of classical Indian dance. This came from my teacher. My teacher encouraged me to, be what do you say, like be exposed to classical music and dance because he said they're one and the same, that you can't have
Yeah.
one without the other. And there's actually a Shilpa Shastra verse which actually hits that point really well, and I'll send it to you to say that basically without music and dance, there's no artist. That's
Wow.
kind of the concept. So it's pretty cool.
Mm.
But yeah, anyways, to connect more with me, I'd be very happy to connect with any of you, whether it's for just sharing information or to also learn. I have a course that I offer on Shilpa Shastra. It's a two year plus course. Weekly classes that are mostly done through Zoom, and then I record the classes and make them available. And I also have short-term classes which focus on a specific god or goddess, and we kind of run through the whole process step by step. And then I teach you how to approach that particular god and goddess and create their form. Those I run every few months in the form of like workshops or seminars. So my website is divyakala, divyakla.com. And you'll find all the information about my courses there. And I also have some prints available of my artworks that people order from all over the place. And lately I've been also hand embellishing the prints. I add a little bit of gold leaf to them and
Ooh,
things. People
nice.
like that. Just gives it that extra finishing touch. And then apart from that, I have my Instagram page, which I update more often. So you'll see more behind the scenes and my process of what I do and how I do it. And that's my first name, DRDHA underscore art, ART. So yeah, be happy to connect with anybody. And Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. That's wonderful. And as always, I'll put all the links anyway in the show notes. So if anyone's listening, you can jump there right now and grab those. Huge thank you to you for this conversation and for your inspiration. It's really such a treat to connect and to speak about something that is just deeply, endlessly enriching. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Emmy. Thank you so much.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.